Hello and welcome to Following On. I'm Jon Norman. My voice is at about 85%, as were England today. A much better showing, but it wasn't quite enough. Myself and Neil Manthorp going to look back at a match that has just finished here at the home of cricket. Darkness outside, the floodlights are still on, and the crowd were really entertained, really interesting and intriguing. Loads of talking points. But England just falling short. They lost the game by 5 runs, high scoring encounter, and one that will be really, really interesting to look back on. And we can go through the scorecard at length. But Manners, first up, my overriding feeling is that good teams know how to win, and struggling teams, the opposite is often true. South Africa just ahead for the majority of this match, but a more confident, maybe a side which has got a little bit more muscle memory when it comes to winning matches would have got them over the line today. But at the end of the day, just like in that first match, I have to say, I think the best team won.
John, I think, there was a clinical efficiency about South Africa, which I found unusual in the sense that it was very, very common 20 years ago under Hansie Cronje when they had an 80% win rate with Bob Woolmer as coach. They were clinical and efficient and cool and calm. And that's not something that international viewers associate with South African teams, is it? But they knew that 9 out of the last 10 ODIs have been won by the team batting first with an average score of 290. So in the end, when it was perfectly possible that South Africa would lose their cool and sort of lose control of those last few overs, I thought Corbin Bosch was excellent. And they didn't panic when Tristan Stubbs was clearly fuming with Dewald Brevis for running him out. Brevis remained cool. Well, I'm not sure he was cool because his 42 came from 20 balls. But there was just a clinical efficiency about South Africa, and they remained calm. And even right at the end there, where Jofra Archer was threatening to steal the game from under their noses, they remained calm. And they took gambles, calculated gambles. Temba Bavuma bowling out Nandre Burger and Lungi Ngidi and leaving left arm spinner Senor and Mutasami to bowl the last over. They were all it looked cool, calm, and calculated. But I have to say, massive credit to England. But with 3 half centuries there, with Root, Bethell, and Butler all getting beyond 50. You do sort of look back and think that it was, in the end, an attempt at burglary, wasn't it? From Jofra Archer, as exhilarating, as exciting as it was. One of those 3 who got 50 should probably have done a lot more towards winning it.
Can I just make mention of the Lungi Ngidi slower ball to dismiss Jos Buttler? Because I thought it was extraordinary. And, I am the first to hold my hand up when I get things wrong. And I'm not saying I got anything right, but, Sam Ellard was reporting for talkSPORT today. And just 1 or 2 balls before he removed Jos Buttler, me and Sam and I were saying how well he'd bowled, up until that point, and how unfortunate, how his bowling figures, which at that point, I think he'd gone for 47 from his 7 overs. And then he bowled one of the balls of the summer. It was an absolute jaffa. And that was the game. It turned out, Will Jacks or Jofra Archer could have seen England home. But essentially, that was the game because England needed about 80, 90. And the feeling in this commentary box was if they were going to do it, then Buttler had to be the person that was going to score 60% of the runs. And that moment really ended the match. And of course, Ngidi had a wonderful day here not that long ago, didn't he? So yeah, that was a brilliant moment. I think that will be remarked on a lot in a lot of the other podcasts that are going to be recorded today. What might not be commented on quite as much is Corbin Bosch. What a performance! I mean, he came in and gave the innings impetus for South Africa at the end. It was a pitch which yielded a lot of runs, but 32 right at the end of the innings. And then his first 5 overs, I think he only went for like 9 runs. He picked up a wicket as well. And in the end, if you look at that scorecard, your eyes would not feast on Corbin Bosch's 10 overs, 1 maiden. Was that the only maiden? Oh, there was a couple of maidens in England. 10 overs, 1 maiden, 1 for 38. But his duel with Harry Brook, just when it looked like England were going to get ahead of the game. It's not often I see Harry Brook on a good pitch, not quite flummoxed, but certainly that was a keen battle. And I don't think Corbin got Brook's wicket, did he? Let's have a quick look. No, it wasn't. It was a spinner. But I thought it was a fascinating little passage of play. And if I'm being totally honest, when Corbin Bosch got his debut for South Africa, am I right in thinking that it was kind of in a test match where a lot of the other players were playing in the IPL or they weren't playing? And when he played his white ball stuff and he performed very well, again, it was more due to other players not being available. So I didn't really expect to see the bowler that I saw today in Corbin Bosch. I thought he was absolutely fantastic.
He is fantastic. Let's start with Lungi Ngidi, who's had the best slower ball in world cricket, in my opinion, for the last 5 years. He's absolutely magnificent. Harmy and I were talking about this last week, and he agrees that it's the fact that it's so well disguised. But that one that got Butler was the best slower ball, and I've seen 100. I've seen him take 30 wickets with slower balls in international cricket, and that was the best by a long way because it was a new one. He's been working on it. Do you notice it? You'll have to look at the replays, and our viewers and listeners will have to try and find it on YouTube somewhere. But he's come out the front of the fingers. He's almost squeezed it out of the front of the fingers. It was an absolutely incredible delivery, and to bowl it at that time in that situation and to take a wicket, the match-winning wicket, I agree with you. But he has been a brilliant exponent of the slower ball for a long time. Corbin Bosch is one of my favourite stories because due to the dysfunctionality of Cricket South Africa, which led to the coaches being sole selectors and Shukri Conrad being allowed to select who he wanted to select without any interference from anybody else, selected Corbin Bosch at the age of 30. He was a journeyman. He was always quite quick, sprayed it all over the place, was very erratic, and could tonk it a bit at number 8. So and Shukri and he reached 30, and as we know, pretty much by and large, when you reach 30, your international aspirations, if you haven't achieved them, are written off. And Shukri Conrad said, "You're my man," and he picked him for that Test match against Pakistan at Centurion Park, and he took a wicket with his first ball, if you remember, his very first ball. He ended up taking 4. Most of South Africa's players were available, but there was a long injury list. So they just finished the IPL. So your memory isn't going. They just finished the IPL, but there was a long injury list. And Corbin Bosch, out of the blue, was given a Test debut, took a wicket with his first ball, scored 80 when South Africa collapsed in their own first innings, and has never looked back. Scored 100 a couple of months ago against Zimbabwe in his third Test match, having never scored 100 at any level of cricket whatsoever. Not at schoolboy level, not at age group level, not at club cricket level. And he's just absolutely taken off. Do you know, South Africa just won a one-day series against Australia. They lost the third game, having conceded 431 runs. Having won the series, they got belted everywhere. And he was given the last 6 overs to bowl. Australia scored 130 from the last 12 overs, but he conceded 40. It's astonishing. He bowled 6 overs on the bounce out of the last 12. and was almost unhittable. Bowled every ball where he wanted to. Truly an extraordinary story, and would never have played international cricket in the conventional landscape of selection in South African cricket. So, kudos to Shukri Conrad. He said, you're better than you think you are, and I know how good you are. So, yeah, a remarkable story, and that slower ball from Lungi Ngidi will live long in my memory, and I've got a lot of them to choose from.
Well, I mean, if you know, when you said that's the best slower ball wicket you've ever seen him take, that in itself says more than enough. Tell us about Matthew Breetzke, the first batter in the history of the game to score 50 plus scores in his first 50 over innings and against 4 different opponents, right? In how many different countries as well? I actually didn't see that. So I guess 2 in Australia, 1 in Australia, one against New Zealand, 4 different countries, or
two,
did
two, two in Pakistan. South Africa played a warm-up tournament before the Champions Trophy in Pakistan against New Zealand and Pakistan. Just 2 games, and he wasn't in the Champions Trophy squad because half the team was still playing IPL. So he was a fill-in. He made 150 on debut against Pakistan, and then 83 against New Zealand. Didn't get another chance until they South Africa played Australia 2 weeks ago. Made a 57 and an 88, and today added 85. He's
how good is he going to be when he gets to play at home?
That's right. Yeah. So yeah. So three different countries. But he's one of those cricketers, John, who took it upon himself to put in the hard work. He's known as a ferocious practicer, trainer, and he was always precociously talented. I mean, played for South Africa under 19, played in the under 19 World Cup, and there was a feeling, I'll be honest, that he might just opt for the easy route and and be attracted by the bright lights of international cricket and the trappings thereof, and maybe be drawn to the franchise circuit. But he's decided that this is what he wants. It's a very interesting story. 4 years ago, when Major League Cricket were setting themselves up, and I'm sure you will have noticed, and many of our listeners and viewers will be aware, that there are a whole host of South African cricketers, some of whom played for South Africa at various levels, involved in Major League Cricket. And there was a huge push by Major League Cricket, Cricket USA, to recruit Matthew Breetzke. He was 22, seen as a bit of a wild kid, and unlikely to forge a particularly long or illustrious career for himself at international level. And they pursued him with vigor and with dollars, with lots of dollars. And he turned them down. And that was actually a turning point. And he said, he suddenly saw what he might become, which is quite well off cricketer playing Major League Cricket, and it sharpened his view and his dream of playing for South Africa. And he turned them down. And my goodness, he has turned himself around and worked so hard. Always precociously talented. And I'll be honest, I'm not alone in thinking that he was. It looked unlikely that he would fulfill that talent, and he didn't do himself justice in his first couple of international appearances. But he's just decided that hard work will pay off, and it looks like it is.
Do you do you think that Tristan Stubbs has calmed down? I mean, that was a proper paddy, wasn't it? I actually thought, I mean, from up here, I don't know if the cameras picked up on it, but I think maybe he had a towel in his back pocket or white flannel, and it fell off or it fell out of his pocket. I think it was his. might have been the bowlers, but it looked like he'd stormed off the pitch. And I thought, oh, he's dropped a glove. He's going to have to turn around and walk back and, pick up the glove. But it turned out to be something else that fell out of his pocket, or maybe it came out of the bowlers today, because Jofra Archer obviously was involved in the run out. But it was extraordinary. It actually belied maybe I know he's been a little bit hit and miss, isn't he? Breetzke's come in and hit, 550s and 100. Obviously Stubbs has got, massive stock, and there's a lot about him to like. But it just seemed to me that he was really frustrated, because unlike Breetzke, he really got to terms of the conditions very early in his innings. Stubbs was scratching around for a bit, clinging on a touch, and then he started to expand. He started to get into his game, targeted Will Jacks, didn't he, with 3 big boundaries, and then he was run out and he was furious. And I thought Brevis, again, it just bodes well for South African cricket. I'm struggling to think of another country who have got 320-somethings in their middle order who look as accomplished and as powerful and destructive and as South Africa do, in those three, in Stubbs, Brevis, and Breetzke.
They are very impressive, aren't they? Stubbs has had a tough time of it over the last year. I'm sure you would have noticed that. And
I think that's what we saw today in that reaction.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. And there is just a touch of irony in the fact that Stubbs was the man who accompanied Brevis to his national record 125 in the second T20 against Australia, and Stubbs was absolutely parsimonious in his use of the strike. I mean, he gave everything to Stubbs. He knew all along that his innings would look very ordinary, and that he'd end up with something like 20 off 18 balls, having batted through the entire. But he recognised the moment. He recognised that it was Dewald Brevis's time. It was his time to shine, and Stubbs withdrew and just took singles very skillfully. I mean, he literally faced like 18 balls and hit 1 boundary and took 13 singles to keep Brevis on strike. So having sort of sacrificed that, I don't think that he much appreciated Brevis selling him down the line. It looked. I mean, it looked like Brevis didn't even call, did it? He just stood and refused to come for the second run. Stubbs had got 3/4 of the way down the pitch and then had to run and dive, and so yeah, there was a lot of frustration in there. But Stubbs is after Jonty Rhodes, and that's going back a long way. I think Stubbs is the most ultimate team man I've ever seen. He celebrates bowlers' wickets as if he's taken them, and he celebrates other batsmen's achievements as if they were his own. He is. I mean, he looks like a lovable lad, which is exactly what he is. And I'm quite sure that he will have recovered. But boy, oh boy, I've never seen him so cross before.
When we were last talking, you were saying how Ben Ducket looks as as in need of a break as any player pretty much you've ever seen. And today, even more so, I actually thought, and again, I said this before he was out, I thought England's chances actually increased when he was dismissed. He looked so far short, couldn't time a ball, couldn't lay bat on ball at times. When he did, clothed it. He wasn't able to steer it between the fielders, and then his dismissal looked so appalling. But he basically tried absolutely everything. Nothing was working, and actually England came back into the game after that first ball dismissal of Jamie Smith, of course. The moment he was out. Oh,
It must.
And because you did just talk about Ngidi and Corbin Bosch in one go, Jacob Bethell, watching him today, we know there's quality there, but when he raised his bat to the dressing room or the balcony after reaching 50, extraordinary, by the way. He is. That's an untapped mine of gold there. But it did make me smile because everybody has come to the agreement in the last 2 days that what he needs is to be playing for Warwickshire in the One Day Cup. And, and then he came out today and this crowd here, considering he's batting with Joe Root, it was different level when he was batting. He is a superstar.
The Ducket one is absolutely fascinating. I mean, I sat and watched every single ball that he faced, and I was as transfixed morbidly by his innings as I was by Bethell's, unmorbidly, because Duckett is absolutely cooked, and you can see it. You can see it, even watching on television, John. You can see his eyes just seem glazed. I mean, he's cooked. But also ask myself the question: if I had ever been good enough to be as proficient a cricketer as Ben Duckett or half as good, and my dream was to play all three formats for England and to play every single game for England that I could, as he has said often. After a false start 6, 7, 8 years ago, he wants to play every single game for England. I just think it takes a special inner resolve to say, I need a break. I haven't got it, because you want to constantly prove that you have still got it, and I suspect that it feels like a sign of weakness if you say, I need a break. I need to step aside. And that's for Ben Duckett to decide. But he just is absolutely cooked. I mean, I haven't done the research. I'll leave that to others. But do you think Ben Duckett has ever scored 14 off 33 balls? Ever? Um, you know,
I don't, I don't, and it was painful to watch.
it was, it
And
was.
that kind of cost England the game, you could say, with Jamie Smith out first ball. It maybe it didn't cost them the game. There was a lot to come after that, but it certainly
Well,
puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the batters, doesn't it?
I know, John, but we spend our lives talking about the last few overs, and talking about Jofra Archer almost winning the game for England, and we're not alone. I mean, amateurs and followers of the game, our attention is drawn to the end of the game. But you're right to point at the beginning. You are quite right to, because if Ben Duckett had made 33 off 33, it could have been a very, very different story, as things unfold. But
Do you know?
he
Do you
he
know the other
definitely
thing
he
as
needs a
well?
break.
He does. The other thing as well, batting was easier. For that first 10 overs was actually quite tricky for South Africa because the conditions, at Lords, it was very, there was moisture in the pitch. It was a delayed start. It rained really heavily about an hour or so before the start of play. Absolutely bucketed down. I was here, and the outfield was a little bit slower. Certainly, Joe Root, when he was batting, he reached about. Mike Atherton mentioned it a couple of times. The outfield got very much quicker, and after 7 overs, England were almost where South Africa were after 10, right? And it's small margins. And then Corbin Bosch came on to bowl, and Ben Duckett he just could not pierce the infield. And suddenly they ate up 3 overs, and they were 54, I think, without loss. 54 for one England, as opposed to about 50 for one or something, 50 without loss, South Africa. That momentum change meant that even when Brooke and Butler was scoring freely. Those two, by the way, need to rotate strike better.
Yeah.
And when Bethell and Root were at the crease, those two can rotate strike and score the big shots. England were never really ahead of that run rate. And that comes from the start. When the ball is going to travel to the boundary quicker, it's a newer ball, the fielding restrictions in place. We all know the reasons why. Scoring runs, that was the period where England could have won the game, that 10 overs. And obviously with the dismissal of Smith first ball, that happens. But then with Duckett, they were always chasing it from that point onwards, really.
They were, John. I just want to turn it back on you and ask you a question. I want to preface that with, I said that South Africa were clinically efficient, and I do know that in their team meeting they said if Adil Rashid is on, leave him alone. If
Yeah,
he's having a good day,
yeah,
just leave him alone and don't let him do any damage. Don't let him hurt us. You know what? If we take 30 off his 10 overs, that's fine. But he was brilliant today. He was absolutely brilliant. He still took 2 wickets with South Africa trying not to upset him. But here's maybe a difficult question for you to answer or speculate on. But was Jamie Overton ever going to play in this series after announcing that he was withdrawing from effectively contention for a place in the Ashes squad? And if he was going to play, would that have changed the fact that England have gone back to a kind of late 1980s strategy with two part-time bowlers to make up the fifth bowler's allocation? I mean, Will Jackson, Jacob Bethell have gone for 100 and was it 112?
112, yeah, from 10 overs.
That's that. It's all well and good talking about Ben Ducket and Jofra Archer and in the course of the result of the game, but the fifth bowler has gone for 112. And I know that South Africa's view is that there is absolutely, totally no place for part-time for having to use part-timers. Aidan Markram's a good part-timer, but he's a sixth bowler.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpick there. First off, I kind of feel Joe Root would probably do as good a job as one of those two, Bethel and Will Jacks. I think that, England have identified in Will Jacks that kind of finisher role. And, he took England close today. Does Overton or would Overton, who, by the way, at the start of the year, England were hanging their hat on Overton. He was the man to replace Stokes, basically. Then, of course, he had a few injury problems and it didn't quite work. And, he was, do you remember he was coming in at 8 and not bowling for England in the Caribbean? Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's a good question, actually. I don't know. I guess they've moved on from Overton because that was a huge surprise. The England setup weren't expecting that announcement at the weekend. But the squad for this series has been picked before then, hasn't it? So
Yes.
so it can't be
Yeah.
connected to that. So I'm not 100% sure. I don't even know if he's in the T20 squad actually for next week. I probably should do. But where does Overton fit into that side? Bethell plays, right? Bethell is playing. Does he come in for Jacks or does he come in for Coss? I'd say Overton is a better batter than Coss. And I thought Coss's dismissal today came at a very poor moment as well. First ball of Berger's returning over, and you've got Will Jacks hitting it everywhere the other side. You just push that up to long off or long on, and that ended the game basically. That over, after England had got themselves back close thanks to Will Jacks, those 2 wickets in the over. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we are with Overton. And I'm not 100% sure because then do you want 10 overs from Overton? Because I don't think he can bowl 10 overs, although we saw him bowl for 5 days.
Yeah, but he couldn't walk for 6 days.
No, he couldn't. So I've never quite understood. There's so much to like about Jamie Overton, but I've never quite understood the role England wanted him to play in the 50 over team. And maybe we'll never know now, because I think he might. I've got a feeling that he's disappointed a few people by stepping away from red ball cricket, but I don't know that, and I said nobody's told me that, but I kind of have the feeling that might not have gone down too well.
I think it's quite obvious, John, that that there are a few people. I think Brendan McCullum was one of his big advocates and one of his big fans,
Yeah,
wasn't it? So,
definitely.
I think that there was a sense of shock. But as I discussed with Harmy on yesterday, or on Tuesday, that I think there's a bit more nuance and subtlety to Overton's decision than automatically meets the eye. It's not just about taking money. It's about I think, accepting that you can't climb the mountain. And I think Test cricket was just a bit too much for him.
Yep, I agree. Let's wrap things up, Manners. Obviously, the third ODI doesn't have anything on it on Sunday. And we saw South Africa pummeled in Australia in the dead rubber with one eye on the flights back to
Yes.
England, which is understandable. But positives from an English perspective going into that match. Do you see many changes? And also, just how seriously is South Africa? Will South Africa change a couple of players for that match?
I'm not sure. I think they want to get Luandre Pretorius involved. So he didn't get a game in the one day series in Australia. So they might have a look at him. But I think Rabada, Rabada's been pretty much ready to play. I'll tell you what, John. In Australia, when he was ruled out of the ODI series after one game, he made me a cup of coffee, and because the South African dressing room was right next to the commentary box, and he made me a cup of coffee, and I said, "So how are you doing?" And he was walking fine. He said, "Oh, I could play." So South Africa are just they've got the cotton wool out. They've just
Well,
wrapped him in
they're
it.
learning. They're learning about the players that they've got, right?
Yeah.
I read your Substack. You got who gave you a mouthful for daring to enter the inner sanctum before
Yeah.
Higginsay
It
Rabada made you a cup of coffee?
inadvertently, yeah, it was the South African team manager. Yeah, gave me a right barking at when I didn't even know where I was. I was
You
exploring,
never
looking for a
do,
cup of
Manners.
coffee.
You never do.
Well, sometimes I do.
Manners,
Anyway,
thank
on to the
yeah.
Rose Bowl.
Off to the whatever it's called these days, bowl.
Oh.
Utilitas, Aegeus, Rose, wherever. Hampshire, Southampton. Manners, thanks for your time today. I hope you've enjoyed listening to and watching, maybe. Following on, I'm not sure if I'm not covering that game, so I'm not even sure what we're doing for that game. Maybe we'll be back for a T20. We'll just have to wait and see. But for now, thanks for joining us on Following On.